Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlawn Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlawn Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Access to Democracy. I'm your host today, Steve Francisco, and it's my pleasure to welcome to our studio today a return visitor, the Chief of the Eagan Fire Department, Moke Scott. Mike, welcome to Access to Democracy.
Thanks, Steve. It's a pleasure to be back on the show.
Thanks for being here today. So I understand you were a lifelong Eagan resident. We were talking before the show that you grew up in this city. And you've seen a lot of changes here. You mentioned you're 47 years old. Tell us about some of the changes you've seen in Eagan since you grew up here.
Yeah, I mean, it's changed a lot. My parents built a house here in 1965, and like I was sharing with you before the show, where Thomson Reuters sits was my first job.
Which is where we're at. We're in a studio at Thomson Reuters.
Correct, and that was one of my first jobs. I worked for Farmer Brown and worked in his field, so I remember watching the other section of West Publishing at the time go up, the warehouse and manufacturing facility, but right where the six-story office building sits is where I started working. And obviously Eagan has changed. In the 60s and 70s it was a farm community. After school I'd go on my snowmobile or go out in the woods. And
you could snowmobile in the city of Eagan in those days?
Yep, you could, and you'd see a lot of snowmobiles here. You could hunt in Eagan. We used to go pheasant hunting and duck hunting and fishing, and of course, you can still fish now, but yeah, it's changed a lot. You know, I remember riding a bicycle up to the only place to really shop at the time was a Tom Thumb store where the Yankee Square kind of mall is now. And
there was no Eagan Town Center?
No Eagan Town Center. That was all beautiful farms. And I could ride my my bike up Yankee Doodle Road, which is a two-lane road, and not really even run into traffic most of the time. So quite a bit of difference.
A lot of changes. Well, you've been a firefighter since 1983, I understand. But I want to ask you about something in your background which I find particularly interesting. You came to firefighting from a different direction. You first had a career in law enforcement. So what made you change your focus from fighting crime to fighting fires? How did you end up a firefighter?
Sure. No, great question. So growing up, my dad joined the fire department in 1971 when they opened up the second fire station in Eagan. So I kind of grew up with my dad being a volunteer firefighter, and as you know, Eagan is mostly a volunteer department. And my sister was the first female firefighter in Eagan, and then she went on to a career in law enforcement. She just retired from the Eagan Police Department as a sergeant. So I kind of had an interest in both fire and police. There's not a lot of full-time fire jobs actually in the state of Minnesota. So I went into law enforcement, started out my first job as a police officer with Fergus Falls for a couple years. I always say that was one of the best things I did because that's where I met my wife, so I got to make sure I say that. And then I was lucky to get hired with the Dakota County Sheriff's Office and spent almost 20 years there working for Sheriff Goodmanson at the time and with current Sheriff Bellows. Great experience, worked narcotics for about 7 years. But I always had an interest, and I still was a volunteer firefighter when I came back to Eagan from Fergus Falls. Got back on as a volunteer firefighter. Always had an interest in the full-time fire chief's position for Eagan that they had been talking about literally since the 1980s. And in 2006, I had just finished my master's degree, which would have helped me either way. I did it in public administration. So it would have helped me either way, whether I stayed in law enforcement or fire department. And the fire chief's position was posted in 2006, and I was fortunate to be hired for the.
I suspect it's unusual, isn't it, Mike, that most people don't come to firefighting from a law enforcement background, so that sort of separates you from the pack a little bit, I'd say.
Yeah, trust me, Steve. I got a lot of ribbing from my fellow law enforcement friends, and still do, all in fun, of course. But it is pretty unusual. You don't see that very often. Usually, it's somebody that's had just a fire background or a paramedic background, because most full-time departments, fire departments, respond to so many medicals, and luckily, we're doing such a good job with fire prevention that there's less fires all the time and more medicals.
That's good, and I want to ask you more about that as we go further here. But before we get too far into this, let's give our viewers a little better understanding of just what the Eagan Fire Department is. How big is our fire department? How many people do you have?
So we have an authorized strength of 150, and that's volunteers, and we have 5 fire stations. The most staffing we've ever had is 120. And we usually keep right around 100, and when I say that, we lose about 15 volunteers a year, because with a volunteer department you do have a lot of turnover, especially as people get busier and busier, as the economies change. We've had a lot of people lose their jobs. When Northwest Airlines left, we had a lot of people that worked for the airlines. They lost their jobs and either relocated or found new jobs, and it just didn't work to be a volunteer anymore. So we have a lot of turnover. And then, so we have 100 or so volunteers on any given time working out of the 5 stations. Then we have 5 admin staff. So there's myself, 2 deputy chiefs, a fire inspector, and a fire prevention officer.
And what type of requirements are there to be? I know you accept volunteers, but there must be some requirements to be a firefighter in Eagan. What would those be?
Absolutely. So the first guideline is we look at where you live, and essentially you don't have to live in Eagan, but you have to live within 2.5 miles of a Eagan fire station. So we do have people that live in either Apple Valley or Inver Grove Heights that still meet that requirement.
Okay. Rosemount? Or no?
Yeah, Rosemount gets a little farther
Kind of on the
where,
edge?
yeah, where our stations are. So that's kind of the first guideline that we look at. But actually, the requirements to be a volunteer firefighter are not much different than a full-time firefighter, other than we provide all the training. So when somebody applies, we look at where they live. They go through a background check. They go through an interview.
Physical exam?
Physical
Make
exam.
sure they can do the job?
Absolutely. And then also a physical abilities test, where they have to pull a mannequin. They have to go up the stairs with gear on. And make sure they do it within a certain time. They have to wear what we call SCBA, self-contained breathing apparatus, the mask. A lot of people have an issue with, once they put that mask on, kind of a claustrophobic type issue.
And it's important for you, obviously, to figure that out before you put them in a real-life situation where they have to depend on that mask to do their job.
Absolutely. And then the final piece is psychological. So it's a lot of the same requirements as a police officer or a full-time firefighter would. And then once if they've passed all those things, we start in-house training every September. They go through first responder, which is for all the medical calls that we go through. Then they go through firefighter 1 and eventually firefighter 2. And again, this is all the same state certification process that a full-time firefighter would go through.
And the certification process for Eagan firefighters or for state firefighters, they all have to be trained in first aid, how to resuscitate somebody if they have to.
Correct. Yeah, and like I mentioned a little bit ago, really fire service is becoming more and more rescue and EMS calls as your main call volume. So that's becoming more and more of a priority. I know when my dad started in '71, you had a choice if you wanted to be on the rescue squad, as they called it back then. So he could just be a firefighter.
As opposed to being a firefighter. Yeah.
As opposed to being both. Yeah.
Or both, yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, as our shows today is titled The Golden Anniversary of the Eagan Fire Department, it is in fact the 50th anniversary of this department. You've stated the days of the traditional volunteer fire department are numbered. We lose 15 volunteers each year. You mentioned some of the reasons why. But I was going to ask you, Mike, do you foresee the day when Eagan no longer has a volunteer fire department, that we have to have a paid full-time fire department in this city?
Well, I don't think so. The volunteer department saves about $3 to $3.5 million a year with having a volunteer department. So if you look at a similar size city as Eagan, and if they have a full-time department, their budget's usually $3 to $3.5 million a year more, and that's all staffing costs. Which, if you think about it, if you have to start staffing 2 or 3 stations, because that's all you'd be able to afford to staff, is maybe 2 stations in Eagan. That's going to be 40 firefighters approximately, because of your 24-hour coverage and shift work. And you start timesing that by how much your benefits and salaries are, and you're looking at least a $3 million expense.
So it's not unusual that a city of our size, where about 60-some thousand people live in Eagan, it's not unusual for us to have a volunteer fire department.
It's unusual to have a total volunteer department like we do.
Except for the 5 paid full-time.
Correct, and and the 5 full-time are really admin staff. But there's one step in between a full-time department and a volunteer department, and that's called a department that has a duty crew. So what they do is they take their volunteers and they actually have them work duty shifts. So instead of all of us wear pagers, the volunteers wear pagers. And right now the way it's set up is if the pager goes off, you might be at home, you might be out eating dinner, some people can even leave from work. When your pager goes off, you respond to your assigned station. Well, obviously there's a travel time in there going to the station, and there's an uncertainty from my end. I don't know how many people are going to show up. So there's no shifts. You could have 3 people show up, you could have nobody show up, or you could have 10 people show up. But what a lot of cities of our size have gone to is instead of having all volunteer staff, is they have the volunteers sign up for shifts, and they actually go to the station. There might be 3 or 4 people at each station.
And they live there during their shift?
Correct. So they'll work anywhere from a 4-hour to 8-hour shift, because they still have their full-time jobs. They'll get paid a small amount, maybe $10 to $15 an hour is typical, an hourly rate. And then it provides predictability from my standpoint, that I know how many people are at the station, and then it provides predictability for the volunteers, knowing what their schedule's like versus waiting for the pager to go off.
And moving toward that process where you have people doing the duty shifts, I was going to ask you, wouldn't that reduce response times? Because, I mean, when you get a call with a volunteer department, obviously you have to wait till the people show up when the pager goes off. And so if you actually have them on site at the fire station, it's going to reduce response times.
Absolutely. Typically, a full-time department will be about 3 to 4 minutes faster than a full-time department.
Okay.
Or, excuse me, a full-time
volunteer,
department
yeah.
will be 3 to 4 minutes faster than a volunteer department, because they're already at the station or they're out on the truck.
Yeah.
And the other beauty about a duty crew is, with only 5 admin staff, we're out doing inspections of all of our existing buildings and all that kind of stuff. It's hard to get into all the facilities that we have in Eagan. So a duty crew could actually now do some of those tasks, which most people would rather stay busy.
Right.
I think the old Squad 51 movie where they're sitting in the kitchen and just waiting for a call, that's not what we'd want to do.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd want the firefighters
You want to
busy.
have them out, doing the work, doing the inspections or doing fire prevention work.
Yeah, and fire prevention and public education are our top 2 missions. And sometimes it's challenging with volunteers to get enough people to sign up and again, know the predictability of guaranteeing that we'll have somebody at the public education or fire prevention event, because you don't know if anybody signed up.
So I'm curious, some people may be wondering, how many fire trucks do we have? How much apparatus do you have?
So we have 31 pieces of equipment, and that's everything from boats and ATVs all the way up to a ladder truck.
I was going to ask about the boats because, people forget sometimes. We live in a city that has numerous lakes and ponds. There's a pond right in back of the house where I live off Diffley. We're also bordered by the Minnesota River. And
Correct.
so how often are you in a situation where you have to do water rescues?
So one of our stations, each station kind of specializes in specialty equipment. One of our stations is the water rescue and ice rescue, because of course, in the wintertime it becomes an ice rescue situation. We train on that numerous times throughout the year. Fortunately, we'll typically have 1 or 2 water rescue, whether it's an ice situation during the year. And the sheriff's office also responds, but usually their response is they have to have deputies respond to pick up equipment in Rosemount and then respond out here. So a lot of times it becomes more of a recovery when they're responding versus a rescue. So it's obviously very important to have the boats. And like you mentioned, Steve, there's everything from the river where we have a little bit bigger boat that we can put on a launch. But we have so many ponds in Eagan, so we have some lightweight Zodiac boats that we can actually carry in through parks or somebody's yard to get to a
Actually,
lake.
before the show too, Mike, you and I were looking at a photo map outside our studio of the city of Eagan. It shows all the streets, the freeways, and what's amazing looking at that photograph is how much water is in the city of Eagan. So, yeah, point well taken.
Absolutely.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, we've heard in the news there have been a number of real terrible tragedies this year involving firefighters, loss of firefighters' lives. Of course, we think back to what happened, the terrible tragedy down in Texas earlier this year. One of the issues I've wondered about is when you get a call to respond to a report of a fire or an explosion, say at a business, how much do you know about the layout of these businesses in Eagan before you get to the call? Like someone may call and say, our plant's on fire, but do you have to wonder about what's in that building, or have you guys done an inventory of our businesses and you kind of do you have some sense or knowledge of what's in there to minimize the risk to the firefighters?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And it kind of goes back to having limited full-time staff. We only have one inspector and one fire marshal that go out and do inspections of existing buildings. And what happens is now whenever a new building is built, we get their blueprints because they're all electronic, and we can bring them up on our computers in the fire chief's vehicles, which is nice. But a lot of the old facilities, we don't have a really good layout for them. And as we do inspections, we do try to inventory what's in the building and do a quick sketch of what it's, how it's laid out. Unfortunately, as you know, especially with so many trucking companies in Eagan, what's there this morning is totally different than what's there this afternoon. And
Right.
Eagan has one of the most amount of trucking companies in the metro area just because of our proximity to the freeways and the airport.
Right.
So, you know, we'll have a general idea of what might be in there, but we won't know for sure until we get to the scene.
We talked a little bit briefly about fire prevention. Tell us about some of the activities that the Eagan Fire Department undertakes in the fire prevention field.
And we do a lot, and I'll throw fire prevention and public education kind of in the same boat. So from a rescue standpoint, we do hands-only CPR, which teaches the public if somebody goes down at work or at home, what to do until the emergency vehicles arrive to take over. And that's obviously very, very important task. So we teach the hands-only CPR, we teach how to use an AED. There's more and more AEDs throughout facilities. Thompson has them.
AED?
Automatic electronic defibrillator. So it's a little box that you put on if somebody's
having a heart attack,
not breathing.
Yeah.
And it'll walk you right through. They're really, the boxes are nice because when you open them up, they tell you what to do, but they're a little intimidating looking if you haven't had some training on them. So we teach people how to use those, what to do with them. We teach everything from kids not to play with matches.
I was going to say, you go to the schools, right?
We
You
do.
bring the fire truck to the schools and visit the kids? And
Yep, during fire prevention, we hit all the schools in Eagan, which is a task in itself with 3 different school districts. But we still do education all the way through adults and even seniors. We have a fire safety trailer that was donated by the Eagan Rotary Club that teaches kitchen fire safety. Kitchen fires are the #1 cause of fires in the United States and the #1 cause in Eagan, followed closely by improper disposal of cigarettes. So we do a lot of work with our multifamily coalition with the police department, and we go out and meet with them monthly and talk about issues that we're seeing. Again, just improperly discarded cigarettes is a big issue
Big
at a multifamily unit that somebody might be smoking on a deck and put their cigarette out in the flower pot. And flower pots most likely contain potting soil, which is highly combustible, but people don't usually know that.
They don't think of that.
They don't think of it. I wouldn't think of it. It's got peat moss in it. You wouldn't know that. But we've had a lot of fires that have been started from people extinguishing their cigarettes in a flower pot and then a flower pot starting on fire.
Setting a dwelling or a building on fire. One of the issues that came up, I'm on my homeowner association board, and this question came up again last night. We live in a townhouse complex. Is it legal or illegal in the city of Eagan to have a barbecue grill on your deck? What is the law or the ordinance here in Eagan on that? Because it seems every time I talk to different neighbors of mine, everyone has a different understanding, so maybe you can set us straight.
Absolutely, and if anybody ever has a question, grills are a big question, as are what can you burn in Eagan.
Open fires,
yeah,
right.
We can talk about that too, but it's always on our website where they can call us, but it is on our website.
Okay.
So grills, and it's kind of an interesting piece of history, but the state adopted a voluntary code in 1987 after an apartment fire in Eagan that was caused by a barbecue. It was one of the worst fires in Eagan's history.
Was it a charcoal barbecue?
It
or
was. It was a
gas?
charcoal. It was a charcoal, and
Okay.
the gentleman had disposed of his briquettes in a paper bag and left them on his second floor or third floor balcony, and it started the balcony on fire. It was a 96-degree day, very humid out, probably your worst condition to ever fight a fire. And because of that fire, the state fire marshal's office made a standard code that any city could adopt, and Eagan adopted it probably about 10 years ago. And essentially what it says is if you have 3 or more units that share a common hallway, you can't have a grill on your deck. So, and I believe your types of units, you have direct access
We do,
in and out,
yeah.
so you could still have a
So
grill.
we could have it on our deck then?
Correct.
Okay.
So if you picture it, it's
I wasn't sure, and to be on the safe side, I've been grilling for the past 3 years in my driveway.
which I
keeping
would-
keeping the grill in the garage and wheeling it out to the driveway, which
And I would recommend that. And even if you live in
Yeah.
a single-family home or in a unit like yours, Steve, we still recommend that you stay about 10 or 15 feet from a house.
Yeah.
Especially a house with vinyl siding. And I have vinyl siding on my house. It's very
So do we,
common.
yeah.
But if you get that grill a little too close to the vinyl siding,
it's going to blister and you could have problems there. And also a good thing to remind people, you know, we're in the thick of the summer season, barbecue season, when the weather's decent, and people should always remember to have a fire extinguisher nearby, right? I mean, a really
Absolutely.
basic thing, whether you have a charcoal fire or a gas grill, right?
yeah, have a fire extinguisher and have everybody know how to use it and where
Yeah.
it's located. We've had fires where somebody just bought an extinguisher and they put it somewhere in their house near the kitchen, but they didn't tell all the other family members where it was.
They didn't know.
Or how to use it.
Yeah.
And again, even teaching your kids, fire extinguishers are pretty basic. But if you don't know how to pull the pin and where to aim it,
Right.
it's a little intimidating. So just you know,
Right.
it's even for the expense of extinguishing one on your backyard, just in practice to show everybody how
Right.
it works, and having it refilled might be
Good
worth
to
it.
know.
Yeah.
We are on the verge of the 4th of July, and of course that means fireworks and people buying sparklers and other devices that make loud noises. What's the law on that in Eagan?
So obviously, you can use any fireworks in Eagan that are legal to buy in Minnesota. So if you go to any of the stores in the state here and buy fireworks, you can use those in Eagan. Now if you go over to Wisconsin and you're buying a lot of the big stuff that shoots up in the air, those are not legal in Eagan. And even the ones that are legal, I would just ask people to use caution each year. This year it's a little bit wet compared to other years, but each year we usually have a couple grass fires that are started from people with fireworks. And also we usually have a couple people get burnt in their hands from lighting fireworks. Just use a lot of caution if you're going to be using fireworks, and be respectful to your neighbors.
Let me ask you about something that, hopefully this never comes to pass. We never have to worry about this, but Eagan sits the flight path, Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. Is our fire department ready in the event of an airplane crash? If it were to happen, heaven forbid, right here in the middle of Eagan?
Yeah.
Are we ready for a tornado? We just saw a horrible tornado go through Moore, Oklahoma, and the Oklahoma City area recently. Are we ready for those types of emergencies? And what kind of training do our firefighters go through to deal with those issues?
Great question. As far as the airport goes, we're part of a task force. That's all the cities that surround the airport, including Minneapolis, St. Paul, the airport fire itself, all the sheriff's offices, and we train at least 4 times a year with all those agencies.
Joint exercise.
Correct. Correct. Yep. We have one coming up down in the River Valley, and that's one of the greatest fears is that an airplane goes down in the River Valley. Very hard area to access. It's very marshy down there, so even traditional boats have a hard time down there. Dakota County Sheriff's Office recently got an airboat because of that concern. And several other cities or communities have airboats. So we train as a group on that exercise, but we also train, if not annually, every couple of years on a large-scale exercise with other fire departments. Right now we're looking at taking advantage of Lockheed Martin building being empty and training with some of our neighboring fire departments on a drill that a tornado just came through and hit a large-scale facility. So we're always doing group exercises, because when something like that large comes through, you need to rely on some help from your neighbors.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you next too, Mike. What type of mutual aid agreements are in place with surrounding communities? Burnsville, Apple Valley, Rosemount?
Yep, great question too. We're a member of Dakota County Mutual Aid Agreement, so there's 11 fire departments in Dakota County, and we'll go help anybody and they'll come and help us. And we're also mutual aided with Bloomington, the airport, Richfield, because of the close proximity. And again, there's mutual aid, and in the last 5-6 years, there's a new term called auto aid, and we really like this one. It's automatic aid. So instead of saying to the dispatch center, can you have Burnsville start and help us on this apartment fire, certain areas of our city will automatically have help from other cities. So, and real good example, we had a fire in a warehouse area right near the Mendota Heights border, and automatically the first alarm, so alarms mean how many times you're paging out different units, different stations. So the first alarm brought 2 Eagan fire stations and then Mendota Heights Fire Department in, because they were closer than our city.
And again, so people understand this, anything that you can do to reduce the response time is going to help save lives, potentially, in an emergency.
Absolutely. A fire doubles in size every minute. So from a fire standpoint, the quicker you can get there, the less damage you're going to have, the more chance that you're going to be able to put the fire out. Or if there is a rescue, the more chance that you're going to be able to save somebody. Somebody that's not breathing, so in a rescue situation, 4 minutes of non-breathing can cause permanent brain damage. So obviously, any type of emergency that we're getting called out to, we want to get there as safely but as quickly as possible.
I want to ask you, before our time winds down here, about National Night Out. You know, it's coming up where we have a chance every year to meet our neighbors. We have, in the complex where I live, all of our neighbors come out and the kids come out. The Eagan Police Department, we had Chief Jim McDonald on recently, and the police come by, and the fire department comes by. Tell us about the fire department's role and what you have planned for August 6th.
Well, it's all hands on deck on that night because there's so many visits, and it's a fun night. I mean, we just love it because it's a great opportunity for us to get out in the community, show the citizens what they paid for. All the equipment that we have came from the citizens, and we appreciate the support.
And it's not cheap. A truck is very expensive, isn't it?
You know, a fire engine's about $500,000, but we keep them for 20 years plus. So I mean, and a ladder truck's close to $1 million nowadays. So it's a lot of money. But we get out and show the community what they bought for us, what we're capable of doing, answer any questions that any of the citizens might have, and we always get some great questions. And I always got to give the police chief a hard time because when a fire truck shows up, everybody leaves the police car and goes to the fire truck. But
so we don't want you two guys arriving at the same time, basically.
And we obviously work very well together, the police department and fire department, but we do like to kid each other about that.
So we are down to about a minute and a half here. I wanted to ask you, there may be someone watching the show today who's considering a career becoming a firefighter or emergency response. What advice would you give them as they're looking at what they should be studying in school or how to prepare for a career as a firefighter?
Sure. Again, to be a full-time firefighter, it's such a competitive field. And a lot of departments don't require a degree, but I would highly recommend that you get a degree either in fire science or
4-year degree or 2,
you know,
preferably 4.
Yeah, I would do the 4-year degree, just become more competitive. But if you look at full-time departments like Burnsville's got a very, very good full-time department, they're more interested in the paramedic training than they are the fire training. Embry Hills Community College has a great 2-year program in paramedic science. So I would go get my degree in paramedic and then start getting some experience.
From there, yeah. And finally, we're down to 30 seconds. Plug for your own show. You have your own TV show here on Channel 15. Tell us about that.
Correct. We do a monthly show. It's called Burning Issues, and we try to take any issue that comes up from the public, common questions, whether it be wreck fires and barbecues and common causes of fires, and we do it once a month and have a lot of fun with it.
And runs at different times, just like this show does.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yep.
Mike Scott, Fire Chief, City of Eagan, thanks so much for joining us on Access to Democracy today, and thank you, the men and women who keep our community safe, and thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Steve. I enjoyed my time here.
Thank you.
Thanks.